In the desert sands, an ancient promise resurfaces like a mirage. When a mysterious stranger returns to the town with a yellowed envelope, secrets buried like treasures come to the surface. Amidst betrayals, scarce water, and an unexpected love, lives will be transformed under the relentless sun. A story of redemption, courage, and promises that not even death can erase. Prepare for a journey that will make your heart burn like the dunes at dusk. Leave your like and comment. What promise would you keep at any cost? The yellowed envelope, stained with red dust, lay on the saloon table like a sentence yet to be pronounced. It carried the weight of the plains and the smell of long distances traveled, while the barman watched, with narrowed eyes, the man in the worn hat who held it between calloused fingers. On the horizon beyond the dusty windows, the sun was beginning its merciless descent, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. In the arid lands of the West, a promise was a currency as valuable as gold, and promises, like the one contained, the envelope could cost more than a man's life. The stranger, a man of average build with visible scars on his tanned face, eyes that seemed to have witnessed more winters than his age suggested, and a gait that betrayed both caution and determination, had arrived 3 days prior, mounted on a spotted horse as resilient as its owner. He moved like a lone wolf who, after long hunts, observes the pack from afar, not mixing in, but assessing every movement, every weakness, every potential danger. The town was like so many others scattered across the frontier, a dusty main street, where the wind dragged tumbleweeds between wooden buildings that groaned at the slightest breath, as if telling ancient secrets. The saloon, the inn, the general store, the stable, and the small chapel formed the backbone of that community that survived between hope and oblivion. The heat of the sun beat down mercilessly on the plank roofs, and the smell of dry hay and manure hung in the air, mixed with the acrid scent of sweat and the dust kicked up by every step, by every wagon wheel. The stranger, reserved to the core, carried 3 striking traits: a fierce loyalty to principles he never verbalized, an extraordinary ability to read intentions between the lines of others' gestures, and a constant restlessness that kept him always alert, like someone expecting the past to materialize at any moment. His internal conflict was visible only to the most attentive. He carried the weight of a promise made to someone who no longer walked among the living, a debt of honor that consumed him like thirst consumes. A man lost in the desert. This promise, sealed with a handshake on a friend's deathbed, was his burden and his only compass. On the 3rd day of his arrival, the town's apothecary, a man with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much suffering, offered him a vial of tincture to ease the pain of an old wound the stranger tried to hide, disguised under a rolled-up sleeve. "Seems the land isn't the only thing that marks a man out here," said the apothecary, his voice soft and observant. The stranger hesitated for a moment, accustomed to refusing help, to carrying his burdens alone. But there was something in the apothecary's eyes, a stillness, a silent understanding that broke through his usual defenses. He accepted the vial with a brief nod. It was the first gesture of genuine kindness he had received in months, a small oasis in that human desert. Their eyes met briefly, enough to establish a silent connection that both initially tried to ignore, like 2 solitary travelers who meet at a crossroads and feel an unexpected affinity. Among the inhabitants of the town, a young, recently arrived schoolteacher stood out, determined to bring knowledge to that forgotten land, with the strength and resilience of a wildflower sprouting on the hardest rock. The old general store owner, whose main motivation was to keep the memory of his wife alive through the preservation of the store they had built together, clinging to the past like a cactus to dry earth, and the young blacksmith's helper who dreamed of earning enough respect to one day court the banker's daughter, his desire burning with the intensity of iron in the forge. When the sun finally set on that 3rd day, the golden light transforming into a twilight of purple and gray, the stranger opened the envelope in his rented room at the inn. The contents made his face, normally impassive, reveal a glimpse of something deep, something that went beyond simple surprise, perhaps fear, perhaps resolution, or the bitter mix of both. The paper, thin and handwritten, confirmed the properties, location, and the nature of the promise. The desert's promise demanded its fulfillment, and the desert, he knew, made no concessions. The first revelation emerged when the stranger discovered that the lands mentioned in the document, the ones he had promised to protect, were about to be taken over by interests that extended far beyond the town. A stream, unique for miles, ran underground through that property, making it an invaluable treasure in that sea of dust and sun. The news reached his ears in fragmented ways, whispers in the saloon, furtive glances exchanged when he passed. The land, once merely an arid patch in the vastness, suddenly acquired the covetousness of a newly discovered gold nugget. A sandstorm, fierce as only the desert knows how to produce, with winds that howled like hungry spirits, and fine sand that whipped the skin, forced the stranger and the apothecary to seek shelter in the small apothecary. The outside world became an orange and furious blindness. Inside, among amber vials that reflected the little light that entered and the constant howl of the wind that seemed to want to tear off the roof, they shared fragmented stories of their past lives. The apothecary, whose name was Arthur, revealed having lost someone dear, his wife, to fever, which is why he dedicated his life to healing others, a healer who couldn't heal his own pain. The stranger, who had introduced himself only as Jack, just listened, his stillness inviting confidence. When Arthur coughed, his throat dry from the dust that somehow penetrated even the most protected interior, Jack took a simple embroidered handkerchief from his pocket. It was made of soft cotton, with delicate embroidery in one corner. "Not as a gift," he said, his voice low and hoarse from the sand, "but as something to hold while the storm passes." It was a handkerchief that had belonged to someone important in his past, a fragile link to a different life. The gesture, seemingly trivial, carried a weight of trust that did not go unnoticed by Arthur, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain and loneliness. The storm outside was a reflection of the chaos that was beginning to settle in their lives, and that small piece of fabric was a fragile anchor. Crucial romance moment 1. Initial gesture of kindness, trust. Days later, when Jack found his wagon with a broken wheel miles from the town, under the midday sun that seemed to melt the very stone, it was Arthur who appeared, as if he had sensed what happened, bringing fresh water in a leather canteen and tools for the repair. "Thought a man who carries an embroidered handkerchief might need help with rough things like broken wheels," Arthur said, with a slight smile, the first genuine smile Jack had seen on him. Under the vast and unforgiving sky, they worked side by side, the silence broken only by the sound of tools and the distant cry of a hawk, hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools, followed by silences heavy with unspoken meaning, each touch a spark, each silence an invitation. Crucial romance moment 2. Rescue help in need. Obstacles multiplied like weeds in spring. First, the representative of a distant company arrived in town, a man too polished for that place, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a generous offer of money for information about properties with water. His name was Silas Croft, and he exuded the calculated coldness of a desert snake. Jack felt the air grow cold whenever Silas approached. Then old property documents appeared contesting the legitimacy of the land Jack had sworn to protect. Documents that seemed to have been conjured out of nowhere, conveniently found in old county archives, or so they said. As a third barrier, Jack discovered that the son of the man to whom he had made the promise, the legal heir to the property, had disappeared months before, making the legal transfer of the lands impossible. The promise seemed to be disintegrating in his hands. Amidst the growing tension, a medium-impact plot twist occurred when Jack, exploring the dilapidated old cabin on the property, found, hidden under the dusty floorboards, a map detailing not only the underground stream he already suspected existed, but an entire network of waterways snaking beneath the arid surface, a vital vein that could transform the entire region, making the desert bloom. The discovery exponentially increased the value of those lands and, consequently, the danger their guardian faced. The map was fragile, hand-drawn on thick paper, with notes and symbols that only an attentive eye could decipher. He kept it close, feeling the weight of that new responsibility. On a full moon night, the silver light bathing the plains and making the shadows long and ghostly, Jack and Arthur met at the edge of the property's only visible well. It was a point of calm amidst the gathering storm. The air was cool, carrying the sweet scent of sage and the earthy aroma of water. There, with only the vast starry sky as witness, the apothecary confessed his greatest fear. "I'm afraid that when I finally find peace, I won't know how to live with it." It was raw vulnerability, the admission that pain had become part of his identity. Jack listened, his own silence echoing Arthur's confession. In a rare moment of reciprocal vulnerability, he touched the other's face with hesitant fingers, like someone touching something precious and fragile, something that he, in his hard life, had not dared to touch for fear of breaking it. Arthur leaned his head against the touch, a soft sigh escaping his lips. The connection between them, once a whisper, now became a silent melody under the stars. Crucial romance moment 3, revealing conversation, mutual vulnerability. When the company representative, Silas Croft, offered Jack a sum of money that could guarantee a comfortable life far away, far from the heat and danger, came the first major plot twist of the main story. A moment of high tension that made Jack's blood run cold. Croft, smiling that soulless smile, leaned in and, in a low voice, revealed he knew about Jack's past, including a dark incident that he believed was buried with time, a mistake, an escape, something that had haunted him for years. The offer turned into a veiled threat. "Take the money and disappear, stranger. There are things in your past that would prefer to stay in the past, wouldn't they? Don't make things harder for anyone." The air grew heavy. The smell of gunpowder seemed to invade the saloon without a shot being fired. Jack felt the fight or flight instinct, the same instinct that had made him survive for so many years, burn in his veins. He looked into Croft's cold eyes and knew that peace would not be bought. This was the first moment of high tension. The town, initially indifferent to the stranger, began to split like a crack in the dry earth. Some saw in him the hope of future prosperity, the promise of water meaning crops and development. Others considered him an obstacle to the opportunity represented by the company's money, preferring the immediate security of the cash offer to the uncertainty of a future they might not live to see. The teacher, Mrs. Albright, a woman of strong convictions and a firm voice, organized a meeting at the school where she argued for the importance of water for the children's future, so that the next generation would not live at the mercy of drought and dust. The old general store owner, fearful of change and attached to routine, positioned himself against the stranger, warning about the dangers of challenging powerful people. Conversations in the saloon became whispers. Alliances shifted with the wind. Amidst the growing conflict, Arthur presented Jack with a small sculpture carved from mesquite wood, an eagle with open wings, perched on a rough base. The wood was dark and dense, the carving simple but filled with care. "To remember there's always a higher path," Arthur explained, his hands holding the piece before handing it over, avoiding Jack's gaze, as if the gift was a piece of his own soul given away. Jack received the eagle, feeling the texture of the wood under his calloused fingers. The bird, for him, represented the freedom he had always sought, but which fate or his own choices had always denied him. He kept the gift close to his chest under his shirt, the warmth of the wood mixing with the warmth of his body, without words to express what it meant, the gratitude and growing affection he felt for Arthur, who seemed to see something in him that he himself didn't. Crucial romance moment 4, exchange of significant object. The situation escalated when the blacksmith's helper, a young man named Billy, was found injured near the property, hurt and scared. Attacked, according to him, by men looking for the map. His injuries weren't serious, but the message was clear. Those interested in the land wouldn't hesitate to use violence. Jack knew that time was running out. The stillness he so cherished was being ripped away from him, and the desert, which once offered him anonymity, now seemed to close in around him. Danger was approaching. The conflict reached its peak when, on a violet dawn, Before the sun even began to tint the horizon golden, hooded riders surrounded the property. There was no warning, just the sudden threatening presence that broke the night's quiet. The stranger, who had been sleeping in the stable after days of exhausting vigilance, his body aching and mind constantly alert, was awakened by the horse's agitated whinnying, a sound of panic that echoed in the darkness. With only seconds to react, the survival instinct that was his second nature took over. He managed to escape through the back of the stable, crawling under the fence, taking with him only his rifle, the rolled-up map strapped to his body, and the small eagle sculpture in his pocket. He moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. The smell of earth wet with dawn dew mixed with the acrid smell of smoke and fear that seemed to emanate from the invaders. It was the beginning of the hunt, and he was the prey. This was the second moment of high tension, the prelude to the climax. The ensuing chase transformed the vast open plains into a lethal chessboard. The stranger, knowing the desert's secrets acquired over years of nomadic life, used rock formations, dry ravines, and the vastness itself to throw off his pursuers. He moved like a cornered coyote, fast, cunning, disappearing and reappearing where they least expected him. For 3 days he moved only at night, guided by the stars, by instinct, and by memory of the terrain, feeding on few provisions and the iron determination not to fail the promise. The sun beat down during the day, the sand burned, his throat dried. But the image of the eagle in his pocket and the memory of Arthur's gaze spurred him on. When he finally managed to return to the town, exhausted, covered in dust and unshaven, he discovered that Arthur had been taken. The news hit him like a physical blow, not by kidnapping but by accusation of complicity with the fugitive stranger, detained by the sheriff himself. The biggest twist came when Jack, seeking help from the local sheriff, a man he thought represented law and order, discovered that he had been bribed by the company representative Silas Croft. The badge on the sheriff's chest gleamed under the sun, but it represented only corruption, a symbol of betrayal that corroded the foundation of that place. Fear and rage bubbled up inside Jack. The entire town seemed to have been infected by greed. It was the teacher, Mrs. Albright, a woman of unexpected strength and quiet courage, who offered secret refuge in the small school. She found him hiding on the outskirts, hungry and desperate, and led him stealthily through the deserted streets under the cloak of night. There, among books and wooden benches, while Jack briefly recovered and planned his next move, she revealed something that changed everything, the secret driving the relentless greed of Croft and his men. The underground stream wasn't just valuable for its water, but because traces of a precious metal had been found in the stones of its bed, something the company planned to mine, not just use the water for irrigation. This was the real reason for the company's voracious interest, a plan that would condemn the region to absolute dryness if the water was diverted for mining. It was a drastic twist that raised the stakes to a catastrophic level. This was the third moment of high tension. The stranger was surrounded. His only ally was imprisoned. The law was corrupt, and he held the secret that could save or condemn the town, knowing his next action would be decisive and deadly. He was the last line of defense between the desert and flourishing, and his enemies knew it. With this new information, Jack understood that he wasn't just fighting for a promise made to a dead friend, for a piece of land. He was fighting for the future of the entire town, for the lives of the people who lived there, for the hope the teacher was trying to plant in young minds. If the company gained control of the lands, the water would be diverted for mining, condemning the region to thirst and abandonment, turning the desert into a tomb. He was no longer a lone wolf fighting only for himself or a memory. He had, without realizing it, become the guardian of that small community. The metaphor of the eagle Arthur had given him gained a new meaning. He needed to ascend, see the panorama from above, find a higher path than mere escape or blind retaliation. While hiding in the school, Jack and Mrs. Albright discussed the options. The sheriff had Arthur detained in the town's tiny cell. Croft and his men, now undisguised, patrolled the town, imposing their presence. Most residents, intimidated or bought off, avoided contact. The teacher, however, had a discreet network of sympathizers. Young Billy, grateful to Jack for defending him, some ranchers who depended on the hope of that water, and even the old general store owner, who, though fearful, couldn't bear the thought of seeing the town he and his wife had helped build disintegrate. Jack knew he needed help to free Arthur and face Croft. Billy, despite being young, knew the town's nooks and crannies and agreed to be a messenger. Mrs. Albright used her subtle influence to gather the few willing to fight, under the pretense of a meeting about the school's future. Jack explained the plan: a distraction on the main street while a small group freed Arthur and prepared for a final stand at the property. The strategy was risky, depending on perfect coordination and the courage of ordinary men and women. The night chosen for the action arrived cold and clear, the full moon witnessing the palpable tension. Jack, hidden in the shadows near the sheriff's office, felt the weight of the rifle in his hands and the eagle in his pocket. He saw Arthur, in the cell, his face tired, but his eyes still bright with determination when their gazes met for a brief instant. That look was the fuel Jack needed. Crucial romance moment 5, preamble, preparation for mutual sacrifice, act of salvation. Arthur, even imprisoned, represented everything Jack was fighting for: kindness, hope, the possibility of a future he thought he'd never have. The signal came. A shout from across the square, followed by a commotion planned by the few supporters. The sheriff and some men rushed to investigate. Jack and Billy acted fast. They broke down the back door of the sheriff's office. Arthur was ready. He had used a sharp piece of metal found in the cell to try to open the handcuffs. His skilled apothecary hands adapted to a new urgency. The apothecary wasn't a fighter, but his courage was unwavering. They ran outside, meeting the small group gathered at the edge of town. Mrs. Albright with an old shotgun, some ranchers armed with what they had, and the old general store owner, trembling but present. Together, they headed for the property, Jack's map serving as a guide through less watched paths. The smell of dry earth and fear hung in the air. Silas Croft, alerted about the escape, gathered his men and followed the D group. He couldn't allow the map, and more importantly, the hope it represented, to fall into the hands of those people. The final hunt was underway. The climax was approaching, a confluence of conflicts and promises under the starry desert sky. Jack felt adrenaline and fear, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He had faith in those few who decided to fight. He had the light of Arthur's gaze and the hope Mrs. Albright had planted. This was the crucial moment that would test everything. The final stand took place on the property, near the entrance to the ravine where the underground stream began to surface. Jack and his few allies entrenched themselves behind rocks and the remains of the old cabin. The smell of wild sage was now mixed with the metallic smell of tension, and the aroma of gunpowder hanging in the air. Croft and his men arrived, confident in their numerical superiority in weaponry. The shooting began under the faint moonlight. Each shot echoed in the night's silence. Jack moved with the cold precision of someone who knows death up close, using natural cover and darkness to his advantage. He didn't shoot to kill indiscriminately, but to disarm and disperse. Arthur, hidden behind a rock, helped as he could, tending to the wounded on both sides, his humanity unwavering even amidst the chaos. Mrs. Albright showed surprising aim, taking down one of the attackers' horses. Billy, agile as a cat, flanked the attackers, creating diversions. Silas Croft, realizing the resistance was stronger than he expected, focused his attack on Jack. He knew the stranger was the core of that rebellion. In the middle of the fight, Croft managed to flank Jack, his rifle aimed. Arthur saw the scene and without hesitation threw himself in front of Jack, pushing him out of the line of fire. A shot rang out. Arthur fell, hit in the shoulder. Crucial romance moment 5, act of sacrifice. The sight of Arthur falling made something explode inside Jack. Caution disappeared, replaced by a cold fury. He rose, the rifle now an extension of his own will, and faced Croft. The confrontation was quick and brutal. Jack, wounded in the arm, fought with desperate intensity. He wasn't just defending himself. He was avenging Arthur's wound, protecting the promise defending hope. He disarmed Croft with a swift blow, and the company representative retreated, realizing he had underestimated the stranger. With their leader defeated and some of their men wounded or fleeing, the rest of Croft's henchmen dispersed into the darkness, the company's plan crumbling under the unexpected resistance. The corrupt sheriff, seeing the tide turn and fearing the consequences, fled the town under the cloak of night. Silence returned, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the ragged breathing of those who survived. Jack ran to Arthur's side, his heart tight at the sight of blood. "Arthur!" His voice choked with emotion. Arthur was pale but conscious. "You're all right," he whispered, a faint smile on his lips. "The eagle, it flew high," he said, holding Jack's hand. Jack felt the warmth of Arthur's blood on his hands, fear and relief mixing. He tended the wound as best he could with the supplies Arthur had brought, Mrs. Albright helping steadily. The sun began to rise, painting the sky with the same shades of fire and blood as the day Jack arrived, but now the light seemed different, promising a new beginning. In the days that followed the confrontation, tension gave way to cautious exhaustion and gradually to renewed hope. Arthur recovered slowly, in the apothecary, with Jack by his side most of the time. That act of sacrifice had sealed the bond between them in a way words couldn't express, a tie forged in shared danger and vulnerability. Jack cared for Arthur with a tenderness few could have, imagined in that quiet man hardened by the desert. Arthur, in turn, saw in Jack not just the fighter, but the protective and loyal soul under the hard shell. Crucial romance moment 5, care and recovery after sacrifice. With Croft and the sheriff out of the picture, the town began to reorganize. The map Jack had found, showing the vast network of underground water, became the symbol of the region's potential future. Mrs. Albright led efforts to contact county authorities who were not corrupt, presenting evidence of the company's plans and the attempt at fraud and violence. The old general store owner, inspired by the courage of others, became a fervent advocate for the use of water for the community. Billy, the blacksmith's helper, gained the respect he so desired, his act of bravery on the night of the confrontation proving his worth. A positive medium-impact twist occurred when a letter arrived, months later, bringing news about the son of the man to whom Jack had made the promise. He was alive in a neighboring state, recovering from a prolonged illness and with affected memory. The news allowed the legal arrangements for the property to finally be made, fulfilling the promise in its entirety. The desert seemed at last to yield some of its harshness. The final resolution of the main plot, which brought relief, came with the arrival of representatives from the federal government, alerted to the existence of the water and the company's attempt to monopolize it. The area was declared of public interest, and plans were initiated for an irrigation system that would benefit the entire region, not just a single greedy entity. The water, once a mirage beneath the earth, became a palpable reality, a beacon of light in the desert. The faith some held in the redemption of that land proved justified. The cost, however, was clear. Jack had been wounded. Arthur was still recovering, and peace came after violence and fear. Life in the desert would never be easy, but now there was hope. The smell of gunpowder gave way to the smell of wet earth, and the sound of shots was replaced by the sound of flowing water. As Arthur healed and the town began to plan its watered future, the relationship between him and Jack blossomed in the quiet of the apothecary. They talked for hours, sharing not just stories but fears and dreams. Jack, the man who ran from the past, found in Arthur a present he didn't know he needed. Arthur, the man who feared peace, found in Jack the security to embrace it. They were like two desert plants, each tough and solitary, but together, finding the ability to bloom, their roots intertwined beneath the surface. The vulnerability they had shown each other at the well was now the foundation of deep trust. One morning, as the sun rose and the air was still cool, Jack sat by Arthur's bed. The wooden eagle was on the bedside table. "You saved me," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Arthur smiled faintly. "We saved each other, Jack. You brought me the hope that peace is possible, and I guess I just showed you it's worth fighting for, and for who you care about." They exchanged a long look heavy with everything that didn't need to be said. The promise Jack had made to a dead friend had led him there, but the unspoken promise being born between him and Arthur, a promise of future and companionship, was what would make him stay. The apothecary recovered completely. Jack, the stranger, who had come to fulfill a promise from the past, found his place in that town. He was no longer a lone wolf wandering the plains. He had found his pack, or at least a loyal and loved companion. The water map was handed over to the authorities and became the project for a prosperous future. The land he had promised to protect would become the heart of a revitalized region. Life went on, not without challenges, for the desert always demanded its price. But now there was a different resilience in the town, forged in struggle and unity. The smell of rain on dry earth, rare and precious, was the fragrance of victory. The sound of water in the future channels would be the melody of hope. Jack and Arthur built a life together in the apothecary, a refuge of calm and healing in the heart of that untamed West. Jack never had to carry his burdens alone again. Arthur never feared peace again. They saw the land begin to change. Small, green shoots emerging where before there had only been dust. They saw children playing near the new irrigation channels. They saw faith reborn in people's eyes. Jack, the man of scars and a dark past, found the light he sought in the apothecary's gentle eyes and in the hope he himself had helped plant. The old general store owner finally yielded, seeing that change could bring new life. Billy became a skilled blacksmith, and the future with the banker's daughter seemed more promising. Mrs. Albright continued teaching, her lessons now including not just reading and writing but also resilience, courage, and the importance of water. On rare nights, Jack and Arthur sat outside the apothecary, watching the stars that were brighter in the desert, feeling the cool breeze that eased the day's heat. The wooden eagle was on a shelf, a silent reminder of the journey. Jack held Arthur's hand, feeling the soft skin contrasting with his own, calloused. The silence between them was no longer one of strangeness or secrets, but of comfort and love. He thought of the promise that had brought him there, fulfilled, and the new implicit promise that kept him there, a vow to the future. Faith in life, the light in the eyes of the one you love, the hope that blooms even in the most barren soil. And you, when will you let hope bloom in your desert?